Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wellbeing Wednesday, episode 28. 28 weeks straight we've been going, and we've also made the decision to, at episode 30, to press pause on Wellbeing Wednesday, just because everyone's starting to, well, most parts of Australia have been free for quite a while, but Victoria's starting to free up, and we thought that it might be a good point 30 weeks in just to press pause, do a review and see where we go next with it, whether it's in a different format, just see what the needs are. So we'll be in touch with everyone about that. But today we have a great Wellbeing Wednesday for you. And we've got a variety of participants tuning in from different parts of Australia. And I'm going to hand it over. My name's Cynthia Marnie, I beg your pardon, and I'm a leadership development facilitator and a coach. And so wellbeing is a real passion of mine because I'm interested in how we unlock high performance in ourselves and in teams and as leaders. And I believe that wellbeing is a pivotal part of us being able to get the best out of ourselves. And all the research shows that happier people are higher performing. So I reckon if we can all take some time to look after our wellbeing, then we'll all be happier. And as a result of that, we'll be better performing at work and also in our lives. So I'm going to hand over to Louise, who's in the driver's seat today. Welcome, Louise, and can you take us through the session today?
Thank you, Cynthia. And as most of you know, that if you have been flying with us over the last 20 weeks, so a little hello, our frequent flyers. We've been working together over the years, and we have that joint passion of wellbeing and getting us in the driver's seat of having a really functioning body and a functioning mind, so we can do our best. And it's great to have, you realise when you are locked in how important people are. When I was chatting to Brigid earlier, it made me think about the important people in life and what people do in your life for your wellbeing. And while, as most of you know, Malcolm has been overseas, he did come home last week, which was great. And one of our friends, Andrew, I call him Andy Pandy, he was messaging me every week, the probably weekly phone call to see how I was, to check in. And, it just goes to show the importance of connection. So when I reached out a few weeks ago to a group of friends who we call the Champagne Chicks, I asked, look, we're looking for some remarkable women in your life that we could interview on our Wellbeing Wednesday. And Judy Mackenzie, who's with us today from Mount Macedon, hi Judy, she recommended Brigid. And Brigid, welcome, Brigid Donovan. You are in the virtual couch today, our Wellbeing couch.
Thanks, Louise and Cynthia, and lovely to meet everyone. Hi to everyone out there online.
Yes, and quite a few will be watching at a later time, but it is great too. There's about 17 of us online at the moment. So what we'll do, just make sure everyone, you're familiar with your dashboard. You might be on different devices, but go ahead and ask us a question through the chat room. Cynthia will keep an eye on that. Commentary, have that other conversation, because we know your brains are faster than us talking and you'll want a separate conversation, and that's cool. Cynthia will keep an eye on that. And the Q&A box is there if you want to ensure we don't forget to ask your particular question. And we've had a first. We actually had an email question, email to us to ensure we don't forget. So I will get to that question as we have a chat. And that's what it will be, Brigid, just some questions, see where our conversation goes. But we've been really fortunate for 27 weeks to just listen and learn, and people are surprised about the wisdom that they kind of carry around and don't always get to share. So the fact that you were introduced to us through Judy Mackenzie, who's in the Mount Macedon area, we know you're over in that direction in the region of Victoria. Tell us a bit about your place, where you are. What would we see if we had a drone flying over your property?
Well, if you had a drone last Friday, as Judy would well know, it was snowing here. I was sitting in my office looking out at the snow, which was absolutely gorgeous. Would have been snowing a lot more up at Mount Macedon where Judy lives. So we live on 10 acres and I've got 2 kids. So we've got, a relatively big house for teenagers. And I don't know, sometimes I just feel like it's just an animal farm because we've got 3 dogs, 3 cats, 2 horses and chickens. But I think particularly during COVID where we've all been home, the dogs, which used to spend all day outside, are just inside constantly. So hopefully the little mutt won't annoy us, but she's constantly in and out of my office. The 2 big dogs, which used to be outside, I went into my son's bedroom this morning and the big black Labrador's just lying there on his pillow. Like they've just come to think that this is perfectly normal. So yeah, I am living the dream, as they say, because I actually was one of those poor children who grew up in inner city Melbourne and was just mad about horses and just desperately wanted to live in the country. And I actually used to come up to this area from a very young age. My best friend in prep, her parents were from Woodend nearby. So I used to come up here a lot. I used to come up horse riding. I gisted horses in this area for many years. And I was doing a story on a woman one day called Lee Woodgate when I worked for Australian Story, and she'd had some incredibly horrific horse accident, which during a jumps race and, almost died, spent 6 months in hospital, blah, 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 blah. And I was talking to her about how I really wanted to live in the country. I was sick of having to drive up on the weekends and rush back to Melbourne, and how depressed I felt as I, came in over the Balti Bridge. And she just said, well, just do something about it, and I was like, oh, okay. What, you actually think I can really do this? And she said, yeah, you just got to do it. And she just had a saying which really stuck with me, and that is just find a way. So I've always been good at finding a way. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer. So I managed to convince my husband that we would just trial living out here, and we rented a house for a year in Macedon actually, which was bloody freezing. And then I just said to the family, I want this move to be for us, not for me. One time my husband said to me, oh, we're moving up here for mummy and her horses. And I just said to him, if that's what you think, forget it. We'll stay in Melbourne and I'll keep commuting. I want this to be for our whole family. And he's never mentioned that again. And he actually, being a city boy, has probably been the most surprising person in how much he loves living up here.
What about your kids, Brigid? You said you've got 2. How did they cope with the change, or was that before they arrived?
No, it was good timing actually, because my son he'd started school in Melbourne. He was in grade 2 and my daughter was just about to start prep. So yeah, it was a really good time to move. I remember thinking, if we'd moved and the kids were much younger, if they were, in that childcare age, would have been much harder. But I think starting school here, that's all my daughter knows now. And my son, who's 16, and I think he went through a stage a few years ago where he wished we still lived in Melbourne. But now he's discovered, the whole shed, which my husband has everything in, and motorbikes and freedom. And, he wanted to go out camping out overnight, and he's now at that stage where I think he also realises we're lucky enough that the train ride to Melbourne is only 50 minutes. So pre-COVID, he used to often go up to Melbourne for the weekend. So I think he now realises it's the best of both worlds.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? And so tell me, I just picked up when you said you felt when you went over the Balti Bridge, did you say like a depression?
Yeah.
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 I wonder if anyone else feels that. I've just, Cynthia, when you come back to Melbourne from Vanilla, do you feel a change when you enter the kind of the city?
No, I don't. But if I haven't been to the country for a while, I feel when I'm leaving Melbourne, I feel like, a weight lifts off me.
Yeah, okay.
But I really, I'm very lucky because, again, I've got 2 things going on. So, and I love both. That's always been my problem. I like both equally, but I always feel like I'm not sure I could live in one totally. I like having the option of both.
Yeah, I feel a bit like that too now. I had to go up to Melbourne for a medical appointment last week, and the closest place I could get a park was Victoria Market. I was so excited going to Victoria Market because I grew up going there with my mum every week, and still the bratwurst stall is there and still the same stalls that we used to go to. And it was interesting because I went and got my bratwurst and got some beautiful cheeses and some beautiful fresh fruit and veg. And I came home and walked in the door and the kids said to me, "You're so happy. What happened?" you know? And because it was just reconnecting with my favourite place of Melbourne, which would be the Victoria Market. So now when I go to Melbourne, I just appreciate things like that. And I think I've lived interstate as well in Sydney and Brisbane. And once again, I remember it was coming back to Melbourne, going to the Victoria Market. That's just what Melbourne is for me.
Oh, isn't that gorgeous? And I suppose just talking about travelling then, and now's probably the time, tell us a bit about your work, because when we talked earlier, we were talking about airports and how you really don't miss airports. But tell us about your job. How's that helped or hindered your health and your well-being?
Yeah, I mean, look, anyone who's travelled a lot for work, very quickly you realise that, yeah, travelling isn't that exciting when you're having to do it all the time. I think when I used to do it for Australian Story as well, it was quite a stressful job. So whenever you were travelling somewhere, all that time in the plane, I would be like thinking about the story and writing questions, and it was never really a very relaxing time. I always liked coming home because it was like, right, give me a glass of wine, you know, the story's done. So, yeah, and I mean, for Australian Story, we didn't actually have a big budget for travelling. So, you know, we might just go away for a couple of days here and there. But since we started Backroads, when we first started 5 years ago, I was the founding executive producer, but I was also really the only producer. There was one other person we employed. So I did all the travelling. That was hard because we would be away for up to 10 days. And that's 5 years ago. So the kids were, you know, 5 years younger. So, you know, 9 and 12. So we actually made the decision to get in a live-in nanny, and that changed my life. That was just fantastic because I think also the gorgeous, we were really lucky with the young women we had come and stay, and they were obviously from overseas, all of them. So the kids were just at that age. We're just talking about one of the gorgeous women last night, Sonna, because we found a cookbook she gave us and she'd written this beautiful inscription, and we still talk about those fantastic women who came to stay. But I think when you're traveling and you don't have that sort of backup, I've never really had family who are, you know, come in and help. That's really hard because you're trying to organise going. I remember going away for Australian Story, and I'd be, you know, before I met Pete, I'd be living on my own, but I had a dog. So, and I had horses up here. So what I'd do is I'm preparing for the story. It wasn't just packing my bag and all my work stuff. I then had to drive up here, sort out all the horses' feeds for a week, then go and drop the dog off at the kennel. And by the time I get to the airport, I'd just be absolutely exhausted because, yeah, having to organise all of that other stuff. Whereas I think when we were lucky enough to have someone living in with us, yeah, it was just much better because I just knew that the kids were being looked after and fed, and just took away that guilt, I think.
Oh, tell me about the guilt. What guilt? Because we know that guilt really affects our well-being. What guilt did you feel?
Well, I suppose when I used to travel and the kids were young, you know, you just know what it's like. There's so much to do at home when the kids are little, and luckily Pete, my husband's always been very domestic, and that he used to work as a chef and stuff like that. But yeah, you'd still try and organise everything for them, wouldn't you? Whether it's play dates or, you know, whatever it is. So yeah, you just feel guilty because you're not around doing that kind of stuff.
And is it that you felt that it was still your role to do the work that your husband was doing?
Yeah, and often I would be arranging all that stuff, whereas I think when we had someone living here who was solely here to look after the kids, I knew that that person had all the time to look after them and that was giving them great experiences and would drive them around to basketball practice or whatever, and that was their sole role. Whereas I think anyone who's been a working mum probably knows that feeling of you're not always doing either job properly. So I think that's something I've probably struggled with over the years. And I think on top of that, trying to find time to look after yourself in amongst all that is really hard, but it's a really important thing, because if you don't do it, you pay the price, which I have a few times.
Yeah, so tell us about that. So since COVID, you're running part of, you're part of the ABC, and you've got a team, you were saying, in Melbourne.
Yeah.
How's that rolled for you? How's that affected you?
Yeah. It's been really, really challenging. As we discussed this morning, most of our team are in Melbourne. Our presenter managed to get out of Victoria just before they closed the border. So we've been able to keep the show ticking along, because she's been able to travel mainly in New South Wales. She's actually in the Northern Territory at the moment. And we were just really lucky, because a great cameraman we use, who's a freelance cameraman, happens to live on the south coast of New South Wales, near where she lives. So the two of them have been able to travel. But what's been really hard is I was very concerned about everyone having enough work to do to keep their jobs. So we're a pretty well-oiled machine at Backroads. So the producer writes the shooting script, prepares everything. And then what we've been doing is we've been hiring like a local field producer who would go out with the presenter, who would actually be there basically, but doing what our producer in Melbourne is telling, is still guiding everything that's going on. And ultimately, when the shoot finishes, all that footage comes back to Melbourne, and it's up to that producer to put it all together with the editors, who are also in Melbourne working out of their bedrooms. And one of our editors has small children as well. So it's been really, really hard. People's mental health has really taken a battering. We were talking earlier, Louise, about we're lucky enough at the ABC to have a really good EAP, employee assistance program, which, maybe in my 25 years at the ABC I've used twice. And now not only myself, but everyone on my team is using it like really, really regularly, because we're just dealing with something we haven't dealt with before. And I think, particularly say the editor in question who's really struggled, he's at home, his wife's at home, he's got 2 kids at home. He used to go into work and he'd have his little coffee breaks, he'd be out for lunch, he'd have all of us around him telling him how fantastic it is the whole time. And then he'd go home and, can be a dad, but he's now stuck at home and he doesn't have any of that outlet. And that's the kind of stuff which has been going on with our staff. And it's been pretty tough. And myself, I was finding I was rushing around trying to look after everyone else, that I didn't realise that my whole neck was seizing up. I had all this pain come in my arm. I was getting headaches. And it got so bad that I actually had to go to the doctor, and she, gave me a week off work. But I let that kind of build up, because I'm in my home office, and the kids are out there studying, and I wasn't going out, and because I didn't want to go out and be sort of interrupted all the time. Whereas I used to get the train to work every day, walk half an hour from, Southern Cross Station to the office at South Bank, be constantly walking around the office and walking back to the station and all the rest. So, totally different situation work-wise.
How are you now, Brigid? Are you...
Yeah, I'm much better, but also really realising that, when you're lying in bed for a week feeling really crap and your brain's just gone to mush and you're sort of feeling really depressed, thinking, how did I get like this? You realise you don't want to let yourself get like that again. So this morning, I don't do this every morning, but I did do yoga online at 6 o'clock this morning. And then I went and rode a horse as well, because I just felt like I could. And I don't do that every day, but I once let myself get really sick when the kids were quite little, and I ended up with pneumonia. Same sort of thing, where I haven't been that sick recently, but where you just you get in such a kind of crazy state that you don't even realise the state you're in. And when I went to see my physio a couple of weeks after I was really bad, and he said to me, he could see the state I was in, but he said, I realised you couldn't see the state you're in. So I suppose it's just, you think as you get older.
Just say that again. Just say that again. What did the physio say?
he said to me, when you came to see me, when I was in so much pain, I couldn't lie on my back, like I had to lie on my side for him to actually do anything. And he was really talking to me about stress. And I knew that I had been stressed, but I probably didn't give it as much significance as I should have. So when I saw him about 2 weeks later, when I was like, oh, God, I feel like, you know, not normal, but I can see the light at the end of the tunnel now. The pain had sort of subdued it a little bit. He said, I could see what a state you were in when you came in, but you couldn't see the state you were in. And that sort of shocked me a bit because I thought, I just turned 50 this year. How has this happened? But probably because I am at home and, you know, I've got my family around me, but I'm not going into the office and I haven't got those workmates who are kind of like checking in more. And I feel like I've been the one doing all the looking after everyone else that I wasn't actually looking after myself.
Wow, that's so true. So, yeah, okay, because I keep thinking how great it is being at home, but there is this value add back in the workplace when people are checking in, and we're doing that quite well now from a team building and leadership point of view, that it's important to check on people's emotions and feelings. And that ain't happening at home because you're the one that's kind of doing that for them.
Yeah.
So the fact that you were able to get up and do the online yoga this morning and go for a ride, is it because you're managing your time better now, or you're using the travel time to do that type of stuff?
Yeah, totally. And I think as well, just I've sort of got my energy back now. Because, you know, obviously when you've been feeling really bad, you know, I've been sort of looking after myself, probably not, you know, drinking alcohol and eating better and, you know, not spending so much time at my desk and going for regular walks. So the fact that I'm doing all that now, I feel really good now. And now I sort of feel like, oh, I can use that time when I would have been on the train to, you know, ride my horse or something like that. And also it's just a beautiful morning, and is that just before daylight saving starts where it's really light in the morning, and I love this time of year, so it's good just to get up and you feel so much better afterwards.
That's gorgeous. So I'm going to ask you the Judy McKenzie question, and then maybe Cynthia, if we've got any questions coming through there. So I want to read it verbatim. So, Brigid, I'm aware that you are a very accomplished and talented woman, so just take all that in, Brigid. And I admire how you combine work, family and your well-being in such an effortless way. I know that you have an enduring love of horses and that you are a very accomplished rider, so I'm interested to hear your views on how horses and the Australian bush contribute to your well-being. Now, there's another part of the question, but I'll leave it at that. So tell us more about horses.
Well, it's an excellent question, Judy, because, you know, part of my feeling about well-being and I feel so lucky in my life to have had a love and a passion of horses. I mean, I love all animals as well, and I think it came because my grandparents, you know, they were in New Zealand, and we're all big horse people, and then my parents weren't, but because it was always my thing, and when I was 12 I somehow managed to convince my parents to get a horse because we had access to a holiday house on Phillip Island, and I actually went and you know, worked out I was going to buy a cow and ride the cow, and my mum was just like silent, and then I found a donkey and whatever, and eventually she was like, okay, all right, you can have, that's that whole find a way. Like, I did get the horse, but it took a while. And I think my parents were never horsey. It was always me. I was organising local farmers to take us on trucks to local shows. I was doing that from like the age of 12. And it's something which has been my thing and my passion. And when I feel bad, like this, well, I didn't feel bad this morning, but it's something which I feel sorry for people who don't have something they really love in their lives. And I was very lucky. In 1996, I took 6 months off work and went with a friend on a big horse trek up on the National Trail, the east coast of Australia, and still is one of the best things I've ever done. And still think about it. I dream about it all the time. So, and the Australian bush as well. I mean, I was lucky enough in December last year, I've got friends up around the high country up in around Corryong and Cancoban, and I went up the bush with them for a week. and we're camping out, and I took a couple of friends who Judy knows, and of course we just had the best week ever. And now, yeah, we're arranging our next trip. So that is my happy place. And it's something which my daughter does ride, but she thinks trail riding in the bush is really boring. And she comes out, she's like, all you do is just walk and talk. It's so boring. And I'm like, that's fine. You stay at home. I'll go out with my friends. And it's something which I've always done from the time, you know, I think my son was 6 weeks old. I was leaving them at home and, you know, doing this quick drive up between breastfeeds to ride my horse up here. And yeah, no one's ever going to take that away from me. You can take away other things, but that's so central to my being and my happiness, that, you know, that's, I feel really lucky to have that. And I do actually feel sorry for people who don't have something, whether it's whatever it is in your life, something that is yours and that makes you happy.
So you kind of answered that second part of Judy's question about how you find the time for your own passions amongst the busyness of your, you know, you and the family. So I love it after 6 weeks of being born, you're out there. I mean, what's the lesson there? So many people say, well, I don't have time, I'm too busy, but you found the time. So what is the secret sauce? Why is it some people?
I think sometimes you have to be a little bit selfish, and I don't mean that in a mean way, but it was another thing I remember when I was doing that rush and coming up here, and I've been lucky to have some really good women I've ridden with, and some of the women I was riding with at the time had kids who were a bit older. And this one woman, we were out riding the bush one day, and she said to me, because I hadn't really done much competing in my life, because I never had parents who were really, you know, we'd done a few shows here and there, but if you haven't got a float and parents to drive you around, you don't really do it. This woman said to me, oh, look, there's a little riding club down the road here. Why don't you just go there? It's like one Saturday a month. Why don't you just go and join and have a bit of fun? And already I'm thinking, how would I do that with, you know, bringing the kids along, whatever. And she made a point of saying, don't bring the kids. This is your day. It's once a month. Just do it. And I did it. And it was actually not the club Judy's a member of, but another one up the road. And it was really good advice, but I made it happen. And I think sometimes, you know, it's not like my husband would be like, oh, great, I'm so excited you're going off and doing something you love for the day. He'd be really shitty. But I just said, yeah, this is my thing, you know. And I think what I learned after a while, I used to sort of give him times when I was going to be home. And then I'd get home, and I was never on time, of course. You never do arrive on time when you've been out with horses for the day. And after a while, I just realized, I was like, I'll be home when I see you, that type of thing. So there is a little bit of just sticking to your guns. And even if some people might like it, it's not like I was doing it every weekend. You've got to protect yourself and stick up for yourself as well.
Sounds like confidence as well. I think that you've got your own back opposed to, you know, relying on anyone else, but you've got the confidence to do that, which I'd say that a lot of people that I work with, they just don't have that confidence to put themselves first. And as you said, it is selfish, but it's for the right reason.
Yeah.
Hey, Cynthia, before I go on a different little track, any questions or commentary there?
Yes, lots of commentary in the chat box. But yeah, I just wanted to say, Brigid, it sounds like you've given yourself permission first and foremost, and not waiting for permission from other people.
Yeah, but also I think I've given myself permission because it is something which I know if I don't do that, I wouldn't be a very good person to be around. Do you know what I mean? So it's actually benefiting my family by allowing myself, like making sure I have the time to do this stuff for myself. And I don't go, you know, it's funny, I often talk to friends, you know, Judy's been there with me when it's terrible weather and it's windy and you're having a lesson and you're thinking, why are we doing this? And I always say, well, at least we're not at Westfield Shopping Centre. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, at least we're out having a crack. But yeah, I don't spend a lot of money on clothes. I don't go to shopping centres. There's a lot of stuff I don't do because of that. And some people, that might be their thing, going and spending, you know, money on clothes and stuff. But this is my decision. This is what I want to do. But other people might get joy in other ways, but you can't have it all.
Such a good piece of advice. We did have a question, Brigid, from Estelle, who says, hi, Brigid, when you were on the road, were they long days? And if so, how did you manage your personal well-being?
Yeah, that's interesting, actually, because, being on the road is quite intense. There's times when I've been, Joy McClymont, who you had on, so hopefully some of the people would know who Joy is, the wonderful woman out of Longreach who does this online exercise classes. So I met her and she featured in a very early Backroads, which we actually did on Winton, which is sort of near Longreach. And she had a great saying as well, and that is, anything is better than nothing. So I was sort of doing some of her exercise programs. So when I was on the road, I did still keep that up. And it just meant I got up a little bit earlier, and, it might only be half an hour of exercise I did. And it was kind of a nice way to be in a little town, just to kind of go out and just get in the right headspace, have a bit of a, feel for what was going on. So, and often I will go for a walk or a run. Not that I'm much of a runner, but I do try a bit of an exercise routine when I'm on the road. There have been times, to be honest, where there's been far too much alcohol consumed on the road. We have this saying on Backroads, might be something to do with our presenter who, does like a Bundy or two, but, you have a final drink at the end of the night, and she'll say, okay, how about a final? And sometimes it ends up being a final. And so you kind of have to watch that a bit, which, it is fun though as well. So, and I think you don't have to worry about, there's no dishes to be done, you're eating out in a pub or whatever. So you're just sort of there focusing on, what's happening with work.
Terrific. That's all the questions for the moment. But there's just been lots of comments about connection to nature. A couple of people were saying how they were also suffering from some neck and back problems and were looking forward to going and seeing their physio and osteo. Susie says, Brigid, do you get to Corryong in the high country much these days?
Yeah, well, I just love it up there, and I'm planning on going back up there in December, because I used to had friends who ran a trail riding business out of Cancoban for many years. So when I lived in Sydney, this is in the mid-90s, I used to often go down there in summer when I had no kids and no partner and all the rest, and I used to take friends down there. So those same people, they don't run a trail riding business there anymore, but they still live there. And I used to go up for the Man from Snowy River Festival. We actually filmed a story in Corryong as well, and filmed a lot of these people who I knew. Which was awesome. And then they kept on saying to me, oh, when are you coming up, and go out in the bush like we used to for a week? And I'd always say next year. And then last year, one of these friends, John Williams, said to me, you keep saying that, but it's not happening. So last year in December, we made it happen. And then it was so great that I just want to do it every year, because it just reminded me how much I love it up there.
Thanks, Brigid. One more. Estelle asks, Brigid, what do you think is the tipping point when we should take a stance and carve out that space for ourselves?
Yeah, interesting question. I would hope you wouldn't get to that tipping point. And I must say, I've probably always carved out that space for myself. But I think you wouldn't want to get to that stage where you spend so much time running around after your kids that, one day you just say, that's it, I'm not ever driving you anywhere again. I think it's good as well for your kids to know that you are not there for them 24/7, and that you are your own person. And as Louise and I spoke just before this call, I grew up with a working mum, and we very much fended for ourselves. I don't think I'm that sort of mum, but I think, it's something you have to let the family know, that you are not there at their beck and call for all of their needs. And, I sort of tell them, okay, if you want to lift somewhere, like even my son who needs to lift to the station, it's like, I've got this thing on between 1 and 2. I'm happy to drive you before or after, but don't come in the middle of it and expect to be driven somewhere. So I think it's sort of creating those boundaries as well with your family.
Okay, so thinking of boundaries and thinking of work, you'd mentioned earlier, Brigid, about the EPA system, the Employee Assistance Program available to staff. And I know when we talked earlier, I remember being part of setting it up at NAB, and there always seemed to be the stigma attached to using that type of service. Yeah. And you're saying now that you're promoting it, which is fabulous to come from a leader of others. So how have you done that? Because I just think that's such an important message for staff to use a service available.
Yeah, I mean, it's come about. I'm trying to remember. I think I used it once or twice. Like I said, once or twice. Just I can't even remember what the situation was when I worked for Australian Story, and I must say I probably went along and just. I probably didn't realise as well that you can't necessarily just have one session and expect to resolve everything. I remember going to one session, I can't remember what was going on, but I remember just sort of bawling my eyes out as I told this woman about whatever my issue was at the time. And I felt better, but then I never went back. And I wished I had, because when I worked for Australian Story, I worked in Queensland for a couple of years, then I came back and I was based in Melbourne. And I did some there's one particular story I did about a terrible story about a doctor who'd been murdered by one of her patients, and her husband and the 3 children were, obviously, I was dealing with them all the time, and I'd go out to their house and spend a lot of time with them, and, you get so involved. And I wished I had probably been using something like EAP then, because I didn't have workmates around me to debrief about the sort of conversations I was having. Yeah. So I was keeping it all in my head, and I still think about that family and worry about them. So, because, they're always downloading to you, and I wish that I wish my boss at the time had sort of pushed it a bit more and insisted on it, which I am doing with my staff now. I can't insist on it, but I am reminding them it's there, and I'm really happy that they are telling me that they are using it. There's a lot of stress going on, particularly with the people who have young kids at home. A number of my staff have kids with special needs, and I know they are using it. And so I think the fact that people are finding some good counsellors, and I've been able to say, we've been quite open about it. Look, so-and-so's been speaking, I'm not talking about what their issues are, but has found it really helpful. And I'm able to sort of say, look, I'm using it, other people are using it, they've found it really helpful, just give it a go. And I think we're lucky at the ABC as well. The ABC is pretty generous about the amount of sessions you can have. I was talking to a friend who works for a private company, and they're only allowed to have 1 session, which isn't enough. So yeah, I think it's generally been much more accepted, and I don't think there's a feeling that it's going to get reported back to your bosses.
Yeah, and I was mentioning to Brigid earlier that when we brought it in, you got a report, you knew who'd used it, which just assaulted every possible privacy issue. What else? What else is causing maybe still life and the stigma associated with such a fantastic program available to staff of most Australian staff in organisations? What else do you think might be preventing that?
Well, I don't know, because I think, working at the ABC, most people are fairly open-minded and progressive. So I haven't really found that amongst my staff. One of the first people to use it was the editor I was talking about earlier, a male editor. And when I talked to him about it the other day, he was just like, oh yeah, it's been so fantastic. And when I told him that, you can have, more sessions, but you just tell them, give it a different heading and whatever, he was so excited, because I think he's the sort of guy, he comes from a migrant background, he's got a bit of a temper, he's probably never had this opportunity ever to talk to someone, and he probably wouldn't off his own bat go and do it. So, I was really happy to hear that it was really good for him. So I don't think I think through COVID, definitely that stigma has gone, because I think people get desperate as well. That's my experience. People are just like, I just need all the help I can get. and we're all trying to help each other, but ultimately you just sort of need someone a little bit independent.
Oh, that's great to hear. Actually, is there any chat, Cynthia, going on about EAP and stigma?
There's a couple of people who have said, Susan said that one of the issues of doing consulting on projects that you're on your own with no one to debrief with. And I know I feel that as a coach, that you do a lot of coaching, and then you don't really have anyone to debrief with, and you really need it sometimes. Jessica says she's had fantastic experiences with EAP as an individual and a manager to best support people in difficult times. Estelle said in a former workplace, we used to think that if we reported negative situations, it would come back on us. And I just said I actually went to a workplace consultant where I thought it was confidential, only to learn that he'd been assessing me during our
that's shocking.
chats and reporting it back to my boss. And Estelle says, yep, happened to her too. And Susie said happened to her too.
That's shocking. Yeah.
Okay.
It's really shocking.
Let's hope that one of the silver linings is that will dissipate. So energy or the vibe of where you work, how's that carrying through the screen if you're all working from home? How's that working for you?
Yeah, I think it's frustrating for our producers who are stuck at home in Melbourne in lockdown, looking at beautiful pictures of Cooktown. That's really hard. And setting everything up, and and that you realise how much happens on the road when you actually have to write it all down and tell someone else on the road, all the things they have to remember. I think it's sort of been quite interesting realising it is actually quite a stressful job when you're on the road. Like, your head feels like it's about to explode. And interestingly, some of these quite experienced people we've had out in the field have reported that they've come home from a shoot and just gone to bed for the weekend because they're so exhausted. So it's actually kind of interesting realising that it is a lot of work. Whereas I suppose for me, when I go on the road these days, I don't go on the road as much as I used to, because I've been doing it for such a long time. Like, a lot of it is just second nature to me. And it's all going on in my head and I'm reacting. I'm not sort of having to tell someone else how to do it. So what we're hoping to do though is, I'm hoping some borders are going to open in Victoria soon. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I've got a South Australian shoot lined up in mid-November, and I'm really hoping to get one of our, we're lucky in that, as well as myself being in regional Victoria, I've got another producer based in regional Victoria. I'm really hoping to be able to get her out to be on the ground, because I think there's only so many programs you probably want to be doing like we're doing, because it's not the same as being there. I mean, you probably won't be able to really see the difference in those stories, but we've got 16 programs, and I want to really even take a little bit of a breath and not shoot for a month, just hoping that we'll get some of our people out.
Oh, definitely. Now, I'm sure you've got a captivated audience here. Are there some towns or back road towns that you need to hear as suggestions for future episodes? Do we need to see that in the chat room?
It's interesting. I can see Annalise. We are looking in South Australia. We've had a researcher working full-time in South Australia for the last couple of weeks, so we always find that a little bit challenging. So I'm writing down Venus Bay.
Glad we're going to help.
Yeah, and look, we're always after it. We'll go wherever there's good stories. If there's good stories and, to use a terrible television word, good talent where people are able to tell those stories, we'll go there. And usually you find where there's good stories, there's like-minded people, and you always find other good stories around it. So, I say to my researchers and producers, I want you to get off the phone when you've had that conversation with that person, just so blown away, you just can't wait to ring me or email me and tell me how fantastic this person was. Because what I say to them is, how you feel when you have that first contact with them, that's what we want our viewers to feel when they hear their story for the first time. So it's really important just to have those people who have great stories and can tell those great stories, because, and often those people aren't people who think they're that great and interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
When we're on an Australian story, most of the time you wouldn't have many people contact you trying to sell you their story, surprisingly, but when you did, they were always duds. They were never really that good. Yeah, it was always someone else. Like one of our favourite backroad stories was this amazing greengrocer called Fari, who was up in far north Queensland, and he'd been had his little van going out to all these remote areas in Queensland and South northern Queensland for many years. He got an Order of Australia just last Australia Day, and he's retiring. But one of the women who was one of his regular customers contacted us, and of course when we rang him, he's like, "Oh, I'm not an interesting story," but of course it was not only him being like such a beautiful man, but it was him linking all these communities, and they'd have, when he came to town, they'd call it Fari Day, so they'd all come in, and often they'd be coming off properties and it'd be someone's birthday, so they'd all have a birthday cake, and then the local health clinic would organise to have a nurse in town for that day, and you know, it was just the most gorgeous story. But that came from someone else who wrote to us about him. So I'm more than happy to take any suggestions.
Yeah, I think I've just read Dimbula was mentioned.
Yeah, Dimbula.
Ooh, Fowler's Bay, west of Seduna. Is that South Australia?
Yeah, so Fowler's Bay, yeah.
Fowler's Bay.
That's all good, because we actually did a story, our very first program was on Seduna.
Oh, look, there's so many places. And I was mentioning to Brigid this morning how last week I don't think Steph's on this week, because she's Cynthia, where she's from World's End. I didn't realise it was actually the name of the place. So there were so many stories. And that's such a good point. You know, when we reach out to speak with women on the show, most will say, you know, who am I to talk about wellbeing, and everyone's got their wellbeing. So how about I ask you then, Brigid, what are your top 3 wellbeing tips to leave with us?
Well, I think I was thinking about it this morning. I think you really need to make your home your sanctuary, and that's sort of physical and mental as well. And I think that's what's happened to a lot of us during COVID is I used to come home and I'd have that time on the train to kind of like get rid of any stress I had from work. And by the time I got in the door here, it was like, oh, I'm home, you know, this is fantastic. I'm come home, you know, winter, the fire's going, and in summer, you know, it's beautiful daylight saving, and I'm often out till it's dark. And I think that's what's happened in COVID is that your work and your home life, you know, intersect. And if I come off a call where I'm in a bit of a bad mood, then I'm sort of, which happened last week, and what I never do, I was like yelling at the dogs and the kids and whatever. It's just kind of like, no, you've got to really try to separate that. But also just make your home where, I mean, you know, there's nothing flash in our house, but we do, you know, I love candles, indoor pot plants, like surround yourself with things that make you feel good. I think that's really, and it doesn't have to be anything flash, but just make yourself feel comfortable. So when you walk in your home, and even if it's just photos of, you know, your friends and family or happy times, just to sort of surround yourself with that. I think, I know this has probably come up a lot from your guests, but I know it's something that if I don't do regular exercise, it really affects my mental health. Has since I was a young kid. And just not, as Joy would say, you know, anything is better than nothing, even if it's just, and it just has to be a routine thing. You might be feeling crappy, lying in bed, you really don't want to get up, but just put on those runners, get out the door, even if it's just like 10 or 15 minutes, it really doesn't matter. Just try and do that. I just find I've got another really good little online gym thing I've been doing at home, and the difference I would feel when I would do that class, it's only half an hour in a morning, was just so great, as into my mental health. I just think you've just got to find it. And I suppose what I've found as I've got older is I used to sort of say I'd do yoga and I'd be doing much more kind of active yoga. Whereas now, particularly, you know, with some of my injuries, it's like learning to do, I'm doing a restorative yoga class at 5:15 today, just booking it online with a local place. And it's okay, you know, if you used to do stuff which was really active, you just got to find that adjustment that suits you for that moment. And that's okay. Just do something. And the third thing, which I think, you know, we're talking about EAP counsellors, but something which I think is so helpful. And if you're lucky enough to have some really, really old friends and connect with them, I have this amazing group of friends I've known since primary school. And we were lucky enough to meet up in that little window in Melbourne when we could get together. I think it was, yeah, sort of June, July. I think the next weekend they actually announced the lockdown.
Yeah.
And I went down to this friend's place on the Mornington Peninsula, and there were about half a dozen of us, and we just had good food and wine, and just to be around those people that you don't have to explain yourself, you don't have to be anyone, because they know you. And they often remember you, you know, when we were younger, we were just so much more carefree, and they remember you like that. And I find it really reassuring to be around those people. And we've been having, since we had that weekend, we've been having every fortnight, having a Friday night drinks, catch up. And yeah, I just think if you've got those friendships, you're really lucky and really nurture them. And, you know, they'll be my friends till the day I die. So just really, you can speak to all the counsellors you want, but to me, those good old friends are really important. So keep in touch with them.
Beautiful. Great 3 tips. Thank you, Brigid. And I'm just going to check in with Cynthia while we're still got some time. Any questions that haven't been asked?
There was one question, and there is a comment that I just wanted to acknowledge from Annalise, who said, Brigid, thank you. We appreciate the Backroads program in our house. It's lovely when we see people we have met from ICPA days, which is that
would be the isolated
parents, children.
Yes, association.
Oh,
right.
yes.
Yeah, fantastic organisation.
Yeah. We've
Isolated Children's Parents Association.
Yeah. When we travelled, love the connections that you are creating for country and city.
Oh, great.
Nosh has just said, Brigid, how do you cope with reality trash TV?
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's just say I am a bit of a TV snob, but also because I work in TV all the time, I don't watch a lot of TV in the evenings. It's the ads actually that drive me nuts, and the Bachelor and Bachelorette and all that kind of stuff drives me nuts. And also my family hate watching TV with me because I do kind of yell at the telly a lot.
You pick it a bit.
Yeah, but then having said that, something like MasterChef, I thought this season was, you can find a show where, you know, the family kind of does want to sit down and watch. I thought that was great because I love how multicultural it is. My husband loves food, and my daughter, who's 14, loved it as well. I just loved hearing there's so many great backstories, those great migrant backstories, which you'd hear through food. But yeah, as far as all that other TV stuff, I just can't watch it. And it kind of amazes me that people do some of those shows. It amazes me that people watch, I don't know, some of the breakfast TV. It's just those ads. I just can't stand the ads.
You do reality TV though, don't you? Like you do reality. Backroads is reality TV, isn't it?
No, it's more sort of documentary style. Yeah, reality TV is really unreality. Putting people in really unreal situations. We're actually the opposite. We're sort of, capturing people, real people. So to me, reality TV, you know, the stories you hear about the manipulation that goes on. I had a friend who used to work, she was a post-production editor for the the Housewives of Melbourne.
Right.
Is it the Desperate Housewives? Whatever it is. Those housewife shows. And And she told me that she was directed, so she'd be sitting in the edit suite, sort of putting all, you can imagine hours and hours of footage comes in, and then her boss would say to her, right, this is what I want the storyline to be in this episode. And she would have to create that. So, yeah, reality TV, so not. And, I'm sure everyone's heard stories about the person whose life has been ruined, really, by going on these shows because they had a business or something they wanted to promote, but the producers decided they were the baddies and how everything was twisted around. So, yeah, I find it all a bit evil, really.
It must be really great to be involved in a positive story.
Yeah, well, that's what we decided right from the start, that we wanted them to be positive stories because, I've worked on 7:30 Report, I've worked on Four Corners, even Australian Story. I think The Chaser took us off once saying ordinary Australians incredibly bad luck.
Yeah.
So, that is what we deliberately set out to do with Backroads. Sometimes we might get criticised for leaving out the bad stuff, but, we have looked at, Indigenous suicide. The mental health is something which we are interested in covering a little bit more. But, it's not that we want to ignore the bad issues, but we just think that, there are a lot of negative stories about regional areas and we really want to tell those positive stories. And what has been great for us is we just did a story up in Kyogle in New South Wales, and they got some community project together, and they'd actually sat a group of community people down together and watched 2 Backroads programs to inspire them to come up with an idea for their community. And that, to me, is such a great thing. And also seeing some of these places like Yakandanda and Northeast Victoria was the first place we went to, and just how many people went to Yakandanda after that and how well those businesses did. And that's really a great thing.
Yeah, true.
I'm just thinking
that it's interesting that good news can rate.
Yeah. So with I'm just thinking out loud here, with the borders going down and allowing to travel, your show is really going to be the travel show, really, to encourage people to get out and explore.
Yeah, well, it was good because we had our winter series go to air in June and July, and we'd shot all those stories obviously before COVID, so it was actually really nice to have a series go to air. We had 2 programs on the Nullarbor. So that was really great, and I think there was a lot of interest in that type of seeing Australia because everyone was locked down. And my mum lives in Queensland now, and she was telling me that you can't, I don't know, the Queensland people who are on this forum, she said Queensland tourism's going nuts because everyone's travelling in Queensland.
In Queensland.
Yeah, and actually I know a guy I was talking to out in Winton was saying that, and there were much more expensive cars driving out rather than just the grey nomads or the people who'd usually be going to Europe or something. They're actually getting out. Which, great. Get out and spend some money in your own country. That's fantastic.
Exactly. So Cynthia, we've hit 2-ish, 2 o'clock. We better wrap up.
Yep.
I'll let you do that.
Thank you. I've got new glasses, by the way, everyone.
Oh, nice.
Sparkly. So we've got here, I just want to say a huge thank you to Brigid for sharing her story today. It's been really, really lovely chat, and so everyone's so engaged. Lots of great comments back for you, Brigid. So thank you for taking the time because, everyone's leading very busy lives. So really appreciate you making the time for us today. I just want to alert people to our penultimate episode next week, and that is where we are interviewing Diane Ray, who's another contact of Louise's. Louise has been delivering the goods with our speakers lately, and she is the chef and owner of the Shared Table restaurant in Buninyong, Victoria. And so she's a breast cancer survivor, grew up in Northern Regional Victoria. She wishes she had a crystal ball to try and navigate the future in the current COVID climate. hoping to keep her restaurant afloat and plan its future to when she can step back and manage it from a distance. She wants to manage her time for her better and maximize her everyday, the important people in her life, and make every day count and learn to appreciate going slow. So she should be a terrific speaker next week, and we'll look forward to that. Got lots of thank yous on the chat box. Thank you to Brigid, to you, Louise, to me. That's great. And so we will pause now. Brigid, are you able to stick around for 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah, of course.
Great. So I'm going to stop recording. See you all next week.